Good morning.
Morning.
Well, Jeff had reached out to Dan and I on Wednesday and said, hey, I caught Jill's cold and I may not be there Sunday. So then when we talked to him yesterday, he said he's coughing every time he tries to talk and not feeling well. So I'm going to fill in for him this morning. Going to kind of change direction a little bit rather than trying to teach his material in his class. So we'll just do something a little different this morning. Hopefully you don't mind. What I'd like us to do is really kind of dig into the Sermon on the Mount. And let's spend a little bit of time talking about that. We often will use portions of the Sermon on the Mount and frequently the first 10 or 12 verses of the Beatitudes, and folks will take that and make a sermon or a lesson out of it. But I don't know that we'll have time to get through all of it, and maybe fill in another time for Jeff and finish it if we don't get through it today. But I'd like to kind of break it down in little sections and talk about it and how it applies to us today. I might ask some of you to jump in and read parts of it for me, just so everybody doesn't get tired of listening to the same voice all morning. When we think about the Sermon on the Mount, let's look at Matthew 4 before we actually get into the sermon, but let's kind of set the foundation of what Jesus was getting ready to do, where he was in his ministry. In Matthew 4, verses 23 through 25, it says, Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in the synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease among the people. Then his fame went throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all sick people who were afflicted with various diseases and torments, and those who were demon-possessed, epileptics, and paralytics, and he healed them. Great multitudes followed him from Galilee and from Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond the Jordan. So Jesus is very near the beginning of his ministry at this point in time. At this point, he has been baptized by John the Baptist. He has been tempted by Satan, and then we know he'd spent 40 days in fasting in the wilderness. He was tempted by Satan. He's begun teaching his many disciples, and he's begun selecting his apostles. So that's kind of where he's at. But this is very early in his ministry. And he goes into this sermon, which is chapters 5 through 7 here in Matthew. Probably the best known sermon out there. But he's trying to lay a foundation for what he's going to go ahead and teach the disciples, the apostles, all the people, what he's going to teach. This really sets a foundation for that. He'd been healing the sick and teaching, and he had a great following, as we just read. There was a multitude that was starting to follow him, many for the reason of the healing. They wanted to maybe not just see the healing, but receive healing for them or for family members. But he's beginning to gain popularity. So if we try to picture this setting or this situation as we look into what he teaches the people here, if I could get somebody to read verses 1 through 12, Matthew 5 verses 1 through 12. These are the Beatitudes, and kind of set the stage for the whole sermon. Can somebody read that for me?
When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, the disciples came to him. He opened his mouth and began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you, because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
Thank you. What do we see? What's a commonality of all these things that Jesus says, those who will be blessed? What's something that kind of stands out to you as a commonality of all those things that he's saying will be blessed?
Humility.
Humility. In man's eyes, these would not be good traits. These would not be things that would help propel you in the physical life. And by man's standards, would not be considered to be blessed. So he starts off the sermon by making them think differently about what he's going to teach than what man typically would think. Verse 3, sometimes there's some question, well, what does he mean by poor in spirit, humble in spirit? Dan said it.
People who are poor need help.
Yeah, people that are poor typically would need help financially if we're thinking that. But when he says poor in spirit, he's saying humble. They're humble in spirit. When we think of one of the words he uses here is meek. Blessed are the meek. What's the common thought in the world today of someone who's meek? Weak. And they don't mean the same thing. It takes a very strong person to be meek. But the world's thought process is that if you're meek, you're weak. And Jesus is telling us, or telling them in us too, but he starts this sermon off by telling them, you need to think differently. All these things that man thinks are great things, I'm telling you the opposite. So that's how he begins. Let's read 13 through 16. He goes on, he says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? Is it then good for nothing, but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men? You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all those who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So after Jesus has given the list in the Beatitudes that many would look at these and thought of as negative situations or negative traits by men, and he tells them, you're valuable. You as individuals are valuable. You're valuable to me. You're valuable to the kingdom. When he talks about the salt of the earth, when it loses its flavor, or its savor, what does he mean there?
They're losing their ability to produce good fruits.
Ability to be,
With love.
yeah, and be effective. And when we think about salt, if a salt isn't salty, what good is it? None. Can you make salt salty again? No. He's saying you are the salt of the earth. When he goes on and says you're the light of the world, we need to let our light shine before men. Are there going to be consequences for that? He talked about that a little bit at the end of the Beatitudes. Rejoice exceedingly glad, and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. If we let our light shine today in the society that we live in, are we likely to bring persecution on ourselves from those who don't agree with the Bible, those who are basically working with and for Satan? Will we likely receive persecution? If we're not receiving any persecution, and I'm not saying necessarily physically, but if we don't receive some ridicule from those around us, what's that probably tell us about our light? It's not shining very bright, is it? So he's telling them, this is going to be your duty, your obligation, to let your light shine. Let men see the good works, but it's specific why. Why do you let men see these good works? It says in verse 16. Glorify God. We'll come back to this later because there's another verse in this sermon that may seem contradictory to this, but we'll point out why when we get to that. Can somebody read verses 17 through 20 for me?
Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one iota or dot will pass from the law until it is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.
Do you think that last statement there in verse 20 was very powerful to the group that was listening? How would they have seen, just the general Jews, the general population, how would they have seen the scribes and Pharisees?
Like the religious elite.
Yeah. Yeah, they would have kind of held them up on a pedestal and thought, well, they're the greatest in the kingdom. What did the scribes and Pharisees think of themselves? We are the greatest. We are the greatest in the kingdom. They would have thought quite a bit of themselves. If we back up to verse 17, he says, do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. Who would have thought that of him? The scribes and Pharisees. They would have thought, you're anti-Jewish. You're claiming to come in and be something that you're not. That's what they would have thought. That is what they thought. That he was trying to do away with the law. Of all these people he's talking to, who should have known the prophecies to the point where they should have seen he's a fulfillment? The scribes and the Pharisees should have known they were the most educated in the law. Yet they were the ones who couldn't see it. It was the regular person, the regular Jew who was the low of society in that time. They were the ones who realized we need Jesus. We need this Savior. And the scribes and Pharisees, we talked about it a little bit Wednesday night, they were looking for something else. So much that their paradigm of what the Savior would be blinded them to the Savior when he showed up. Paul?
There's a reason he 3 times uses the phrase, the kingdom of heaven. It's not what they think it is. They think they already are.
Right.
And ever will be.
Yes.
But, it's a different kind of heart in the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah. So it's interesting, the ones that should know he is the fulfillment of prophecy are the ones that are accusing him of basically being anti-prophecy. Dan?
Yeah, and if you look at the Beatitudes, the scribes and Pharisees actually go against every single one of them.
Yeah.
Because they're very prideful. They're not seeking righteousness. They're seeking their own will. And so all of them apply to them if you look at it.
Yeah. And would all of those things would be very, like you said, very contrary. And he's flipping the world upside down with the things that he's saying. What you think and the way you act, particularly the scribes and Pharisees, what I'm going to teach you is opposite of the way you think and act. When he tells them that they need to be more righteous than the scribes and Pharisees, do you think that made some of them mad? Who could be more righteous than us? Think that put some questions in the minds of the individuals?
So we want to kill him.
Yeah, some so much for the scribes and Pharisees that they wanted to kill him and will accomplish that eventually. But for just the regular Jew who's sitting there listening to this, who's not a scribe or a Pharisee, would this statement have really made them think, who is this guy? How he expects me to be more righteous than the ones who we think are the most righteous? How can I do that? How can I be more righteous than them? So he's really changing the mindset. Could somebody read 21 through 26, please?
You have heard that the ancients were told, you should not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. And whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court. And whoever says, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell. Therefore, if you are presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar, and go, first be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering. Make friends quickly with your opponent at law while you're with him on the way, so that your opponent may not hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Truly I say to you, you will not come out of there until you have paid up the very last cent.
All right, thank you. When we take this group of verses, he's talking about the relationships we have with others. And once again, he's saying things that are probably very contrary to what our human nature is, what they would have thought. But he's talking a lot about the proper love that we should have for our fellow man, how we have those relationships. Jen?
Well, we have to look at what's going on there. The power is in Rome. And even the Pharisees and scribes were very fearful of them too. And so they're going to be more powerful in order to protect themselves, and then that makes the people underneath them fearful too. I think it would have been really hard for the people that were poor or didn't understand the law or something, and they're always looking at what Rome is doing to them.
Sure.
And that interferes a lot.
Yeah, they were under persecution constantly. Right. Hubie?
Yeah, they were following the old law of an eye for an eye. And that was ingrained deeply in their society. So this was a big deal.
Yes.
If you're angry with somebody, you're in danger of hell. That probably hit them pretty hard.
Right. He takes it beyond just your actions. But what he's going to do throughout the whole sermon and throughout all of his ministry is pointing back to our heart. Where is your heart? And they lived so much based on the actions. And he's saying, if someone wants to sue you, if someone, slaps you, where's your heart? It's not me first. Yes?
I think like you're saying that he's using this to make a point, like he's really changing the teaching, right? Because these are the religious leaders of the time, and he's saying like these religious leaders, they're told not to commit murder, but you're to go even further, right? Not even to get mad at your brother. And he's going to keep going, like you're not even, they tell you not to commit adultery, you're not even to look upon a woman.
Yep.
So he is really, he's kind of showing how we are to be more than the Pharisees.
Yes. And that goes back to his point that you're going to have to be more righteous than them.
Yeah.
When we look at how they conduct themselves, it's all outward appearance, and he'll go into that more. But it's so much of what they portrayed is just an outward appearance, but the heart was wrong. He calls them hypocrites numerous times throughout his teaching, and we'll see it here even in the sermon. And he's trying to get the point across that where is our heart? That's what's important to God. Because that will dictate everything. That will dictate our actions. If our heart's right, our actions will follow. If our heart's wrong, but we're just putting on a show like the scribes and Pharisees did, God's not going to be pleased with that at all. He'll go into some things where he takes it, what they would see as taking it to extreme. He talks about plucking out your eye, cutting off your hand. We'll get into that part later. But he's starting to set the stage for them that that what's important to me, what's important to God is what's in your heart, in your mind. It's not just the outward appearance.
I always think if you can't feed your spiritual heart, God will give you the Satan right now.
Well, we absolutely,
I feel that way.
we absolutely have to feed that, or Satan will move into our lives. Can somebody read 27 through 30? We touched on this a little bit, but let's get into it. Verses again.
You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say unto you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that you lose your whole body, be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. For it is better to lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell.
I've heard people, whether it's in a lesson or a sermon or a class, and they'll read this and they'll say, well, he wasn't being legitimate in what he wasn't saying this legitimately, you should pluck out your eye, you should cut off your hand. But if we think he's talking about the heart, whatever is in your life that's causing you to sin. But if we step back for a moment and just say, would God want us to not lose a body part if that was what was causing us to sin? I would say he is serious. Now, is cutting off the hand make you not want to steal anymore? The problem's in the heart. The reality is the problem comes from within the heart. Whatever is in our life that is causing us to sin, that it could keep us from heaven, he wants us to eliminate that from our life. And he's saying it might take an extreme measure to eliminate that. Are there times in our lives where there's things that we do, maybe relationships that we have, that keep tempting us to sin? What's Jesus telling us about? Let's just use that example. What about a relationship where, a friend or a relative, someone that we have that they keep encouraging us to do things that we shouldn't do? We need to end that relationship, cut that off. Would that be difficult? Could that seem extreme? Let's say a family member continually causes strife to the point where we become angry and we say things we shouldn't say. Would we be better to separate ourselves from that relationship? Would that seem harsh?
No, it kind of goes back to the salt of the earth. You're losing your influence whenever that happens.
Yes.
And you're losing your saltiness. The influence that goes around you.
Right. But for some, that would seem like a very extreme thing to do. How could you cut yourself off from that family member? If that is causing you to sin, obviously the problem is within the heart. You need to fix that. But he's saying go to whatever extreme that is necessary to stop sinning. Dan?
Well, again, going back to what you said earlier, a heart or a mind problem, the eye in itself doesn't sin.
Right.
Your arm doesn't sin until your mind tells it what's deep inside of you. And that's the problem with a lot of people who are not truly convicted to Christ, is they got all this garbage inside, and that's how their body's responding. And that's why you need to change, get rid of it, get that stuff out of your mind.
Right. And our problem is it's maybe not talked about enough, but not just for men, but it seems to be particularly aimed at men, but with the technology that we have today. Is pornography a problem within the church? It absolutely is. Whether it's through your phone, your computer, there are things that will present themselves probably more often to men than women, maybe not, but that create sinful situations. would it seem extreme to say I'm not going to have a phone and I'm not going to do anything on the computer? In this society, that would seem extreme, that you would have nothing to do with, say, a smartphone or a computer. But if for an individual that was a problem, is that the kind of thing he's talking about here? Well, then have nothing. If you can't fix that problem, then eliminate it. And that might seem extreme to some, that, well, I just won't ever get on a computer, I won't ever have a smartphone. But if for someone that temptation is there and causes a problem, causes them to sin, then maybe that's the extreme level they need to go to eliminate that temptation.
The thing is though, if it's bedded into them, if that's what they're making a priority, getting rid of that, they'll just find something else. They've got to change their heart.
Yeah, they absolutely do.
Because they'll go somewhere else, they'll find it some way if they haven't clarified that in their brain.
But I think that's probably, for that individual, that might be the step that it takes to make that break. Okay, I got to stop having it pop up on my phone.
Right.
So I'm going to go back to an old flip phone. So that's not popping up and being a temptation for me. And I think that's the point. Yes, the problem is within the heart. We need to fix that. But if there's something that keeps tempting us in whatever that sin might be, then we need to take whatever measures necessary to eliminate that temptation. Let's see. 31 and 32. If someone could read that for me.
It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery.
All right. Mine starts out with verse 31, says, furthermore. What does that imply when he says furthermore?
Something's already been spoken.
Yeah, this relates back to what I've just said. Eliminating temptation, fixing the heart. He talks about adultery in the heart, in how someone looks upon a woman. And then here's a continuation of the thought. Furthermore, it's been said, whoever divorces his wife. We'll see this theme over and over again. You've heard it said, but I say. He's changing the way they've heard things and the way they've thought. These two verses are pretty powerful, and especially the society that we live in today, because there are so many different religions out there and individuals that believe, well, there's exceptions. Yubi.
Back at these times, a man could put away his wife if she burned the beans. There was hardly any regulations on the man had control over putting his wife away.
Yeah.
And so Jesus kind of said, there's only one reason
Yes.
that God's going to accept.
It is very clear.
From Deuteronomy 24, is verse 31. So that was the old law, right? That they could do that.
Yes. And that's part of what this whole sermon is kind of bringing about, that, hey, there's a change in the law coming. It hasn't happened yet, because he's still early in his ministry. So the change of the law, they still have to comply with the old law at this point in time. But he's preparing them mentally for the fact that there's going to be a drastic change in the law. The covenant between you and me, you and God, that's about to change. And that's why he keeps saying, you have heard it said, but I say. Dan.
And again, think about how hard that would be for the Pharisees and the Jews to accept. Your prophet said all this, Moses said all this, but now I'm telling you,
Yeah.
it's going to be different.
Right.
That would be very hard for any of us even today to accept.
Absolutely. Yes.
What's interesting about that too is he's quoting the old law, and I'll read this in Wayne Jackson's commentary. It just points to his divine nature to be able to quote the old law, but then say, but I say, so to build on it, actually to change it, shows that he had to be divine to be able to claim that for it to be true, going from the old law to the
And what do you think the mindset of the scribes and Pharisees as they're hearing this, kind of your point too? What would have been going through their mind? Who does this guy think he is? And that's exactly what they're going to say further through in his ministry. Who does he think he is, saying that he has the authority to change the law? But it's important in verse 31 and 32. It's very clear. There's one exception, and so many in the world today want to come up with, well, there's this situation, that situation. He says there's one situation. It's not just women, it's men or women. It applies both ways. But except for sexual immorality, mine has a footnote that says fornication. Does that discussion get complicated and uncomfortable, even within the church? It absolutely does. Because are there situations with children and any number of situations that can be brought up as arguments of why there's more reasons for divorce? Are some of those difficult to talk about? And maybe even difficult to know the best way to handle? Yes, there's absolutely difficulty in that. Is there heartache involved with some of those decisions? Absolutely there is. There's plenty of other places where Jesus says that you will face difficulty in this life if you follow me. And this is one of those areas for some folks that, bad decisions create bad consequences. And that's uncomfortable, it's unfortunate, but we can't sway how we approach God's word and hear Christ's word for handling things because it makes us uncomfortable.
A lot of times we think, well, it's hard being a Christian because of everything, but I think it's harder being sinful and separated and all the things that brings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think we don't look at that way too long. We just think, well, it's hard because I got all these rules. But when you ignore them, you break the law, you do the law, either Christ's law, the law of the government, or whatever, life gets pretty miserable pretty fast with no future direction.
Yeah. Would I rather do the hard thing for 60, 70, 80 years or eternity? Yeah. All right. Can someone read 33 through 37, please?
And again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord whatever you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is a footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say simply be yes or no. Anything more than this comes from you.
All right. And when he talks about swearing here, he's not necessarily talking about using curse words per se, but you'll hear people say, well, I swear to God. That's a pretty common term that you hear people in the world say. He's saying if you can't say yes and everybody knows that's the honest truth, he means what he says, or yes be yes and no be no. If you need to add other words to make it seem more powerful, that just shows weakness in your word, in your truth, your honesty. That by adding these other words makes it more true. When we think about it, it's kind of silly. But if I just add a couple extra words, then my word's more true. Well, you haven't done a very good job of developing your honesty with people, your integrity. There are a lot of people in the world today that want to add those extra words to the things that they say. I find it interesting that he says, again, you have heard it was said to those of old, but I say. He says that again. So obviously this was a common thing with them, to swear on different things, whether it be on heaven or Jerusalem or even God. To swear against those things that's not something new. That's not just our society. That was something that they did. He's saying those things aren't necessary. Create the integrity in your life that people know when you say it, it's true. Roger.
There's a phrase they always say, well, trust me. As soon as they say that, you don't trust them.
Right?
Yeah, it's like they're lying.
Yeah. Can we get caught up in that sometimes where we feel like we need to add something to our words to make somebody really believe us? I mean, it becomes common. We hear those things so often sometimes. We just need to be careful about how we say things. It's very common today. I know there are some people, if you're in a court of law and you're up giving testimony and you're asked to swear that the things that you're saying are true. I know there's been some room for exception for people to say other things other than I swear. I affirm that the things I'm about to say are true. Yes.
Yeah, like just talking about that in the courtroom and stuff. Like you mentioned, I think you made a good point that these are just frivolous oaths they're talking about. And in Matthew, and in Hebrews, see that Jesus swore by himself. In verse 13 it says, when God made a promise to Abraham, since he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself.
Yep.
And so I think that gives the authority like in the courtroom.
Yeah, I don't think we're sinning when we stand up before a court. They want to know that what you're about to say is true. That also, the people you're standing before don't necessarily know you or your integrity. But I know some latitude has been given that you don't have to. For those that it would bother their conscience to say I swear, they have given them the ability to say I affirm that the things I'm about to say are true. Let's move on to verse 38 through 42. If someone would read that, please.
You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. Whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. Whoever forces you to go with you 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you.
All right. Is Jesus saying if somebody wants to beat you, just take the beating? Don't defend yourself. Don't try to protect yourself. Is that what he's saying? Well, he just said if they slap you, let them slap you on the other side too. So what's the gist of these verses? What is he trying to say? One, be giving of yourself to someone who asks of it. Give more than they ask for, if you're able.
Don't be so quick to retaliate.
Don't be so quick to retaliate. Is that hard?
Yes.
Yeah. Something as simple as being cut off in traffic that causes you no harm other than aggravation. What's our instinct? Honk the horn. You see cases of road rage where it comes to shootings at times. Our instinct is to retaliate. And he's saying, that's not the nature I want you to have. Your nature is to be loving to mankind. If they want or need something from you, give them more than they ask for. That's the attitude, and it goes back to the heart. That's the mindset that he wants us to have towards individuals. Even, he's going to go on later, next, and tell us to love our enemy. This is just progressive. Don't just help the ones who ask for help, but he's going to go on and tell them to love your enemy, which is going to blow their mind. we're not very good at that either.
I can't help but think that, on a lighter note, that Peter must have struggled with that one.
Yeah. Yeah. In the garden,
Yeah.
when he pulled his sword and
Yeah, cut off.
cut off Malchus's ear. Yeah,
But how many of us would have done the same thing?
absolutely. Thought you were defending the Lord.
He did what he thought was right.
Yes. He got rebuked for that as well, because it didn't match this mindset that Jesus is proclaiming. We're about out of time. If somebody would read 43 through the end of the chapter, 43 through 48, and we'll wrap up.
You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing to the others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect.
All right. Thanks, Dean. Is it easy to love the people we like? Most of the time. Yeah. He's saying that even the tax collectors do that. And at this point in time, there would have been a deep hatred for the tax collectors.
And it's funny because Matthew was a tax collector.
Yeah, absolutely. There would have been a deep hatred for them. They were Jews who worked for Rome and took money, and many times more. They made their living off of whatever extra they collected. So many of them were rich because they collected too much. They were hated. They were seen as traitors. Paul?
Let me throw out a question here. There's 5 contexts there where it says you have heard it said. It's only in the first one, in verse 30, that he includes the warning about your whole body going into hell. Does that warning apply to all 5 contexts?
That's a good question. Not sure I have the answer for you.
You know, we would like to think it doesn't.
Yeah, we'd like to think these, well, these
It
are,
does.
yeah, it's easy to say, well, these are good ideas. If I can do these, well, good. And if I can't, yeah, he'll overlook it. But that's, I don't think that's
He never overlooks it.
the idea.
You know, the later points about you have heard it said or to not do those things is just as destructive as that first.
Yeah.
It's just against what he's instructing as much as the first one. I don't think we best be careful about not applying that same warning to the other 5, I think.
No, I think you're.
As that is, as much as people don't want to hear that.
So when he says, love your enemy,
And if you,
or face that destruction, if we put those 2 thoughts together, how good are we at loving our enemy? We just talked about how it's easy to love the ones that we love. How good are we at loving our enemy? I think something that's helpful, has been helpful for me, when someone does something that makes me angry or I feel is an attack upon me, so I see them as my enemy. If you can just pause for a second and think they have a soul. When we see someone who's committed some atrocity on the news, we see on the news someone who's done something violent, and it's easy to develop a hatred for that individual quickly, just based on the things that they have done. And if we can pause for just a second and recognize Jesus died for them too, that can change our whole mindset of how we think about that individual. I might hate what they did, but he died for them too. That's probably an area where all of us could polish up a little bit, is love for our enemies, because that can be difficult to do. the things that everything we've looked at today really is connected to our mindset, to our heart, and it's going to continue throughout the rest of the sermon. We've only gotten through about a third of it, so hopefully I'll get a chance we'll come back and go through these at a later time. Thanks everyone for taking the time to read and for the comments in the class.